Welcome to Pop Culture Man Children PCMC is what the kids on the street have been calling it. This is Halloween 2024. I can't believe we're back with another Halloween adventure. You know we come to you all month long. Every October episode is a Halloween episode, and this year's theme is the Universal Monsters. I'm here joined with my friend and yours, Peter, Last Voyage of the Demeter, Marsh.
That is fantastic. Yes. So happy to be here for one of your Halloween episodes, Mike.
Let me begin with what's your connection, what's your experience with the Universal Monsters?
Let me follow up your question with a question. What do you think my experience is with the Universal Monsters? What do you think is the first time I ever saw the Universal Monsters?
That's an interesting question because I feel like Universal Monsters is within a certain nerdy wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if you knew a lot about it, but I also wouldn't be surprised if you didn't because it's a few generations back from like the stuff that we usually nerd out about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna say your introduction to Universal Monsters was Monster Squad.
Nope. It predates that. It is Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein.
Beautiful. That's my favorite one.
Mm-hmm.
That actually might be my introduction, actually. It's interesting because Abbott and Costello, and we've been talking about this all month, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Those are like the Avenger movies in a way. Like I keep making the reference that we talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe now a lot, for good or bad. But the Universal Monsters films are really the first shared cinematic universe, but it's not as closely aligned as the Marvel movies, right? Marvel, once they kind of got to Avengers, you constantly always had somebody showing up in somebody else's movie, whereas for Universal, you kind of had different series going, except for Wolfman in a weird way. You had Mummy movies and Dracula movies and Frankenstein movies, and then you had House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, which are crossover movies with all the big guys, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman. And then you got Abbott and Costello, and then Abbott and Costello met the Mummy, Abbott and Costello met the Invisible Man. So it's weird that it'd be like if the first Avengers movie just had like Kevin Hart in it. And Kevin Hart as Thanos, and then all of a sudden like he was a really big part of it. That's sort of the weird. And the reason is because Abbott and Costello were Universal properties in a way. So they were like, this is big and this is big, so we're going to put them together.
Right. I mean, this is going to sound really bad considering my YouTube channels and stuff that I have, but I don't know which of the Universal Monsters besides the Abbott and Costello movies I've actually seen all the way through. I've seen the Wolfman now, since that's the one we're talking about. I don't think I've seen Dracula from the beginning to the end. And I think I've seen The Invisible Man, but maybe in pieces. I think I watched The Mummy, and I think that was also in pieces as well. But, you sent this really excellent primer before we recorded. And in that primer, you talked about how sometimes they'd have different actors playing different monsters. So, like, Bela Lugosi was Frankenstein in one of them.
Yeah.
You never even think about that.
Yeah.
But as far as the shared universe goes, it's kind of the way that comic book movies were prior to like the 2000s, where you might get little name drops and stuff, or like you might get references to other characters in the movies, but there wasn't, even though it was like this shared world, it was almost like always starting like reset, right? Like you get some details, but it wasn't like this ongoing story where somebody discovered like the formula for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then that person was in the Dracula movie.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think in general, even sequels before the VHS age, they didn't count on you remembering a lot. That's why sometimes you begin a film with like a previously on, like a little montage.
Right.
There's a lot of them, but if you wanted to like see the essential ones, I would say watch Dracula, watch Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. The Bride of Frankenstein is probably technically the best of these movies. because it's running on all cylinders. It's great production design, great acting, funny, ironic, satirical, and that might be it. I have to be honest, I don't like The Mummy.
Hmm.
Although I like the remake series of The Mummy from the 90s with Brendan Fraser, but the original Mummy film, if you watch it, it's basically a remake. It's the exact same story as Dracula. Also The Mummy, we only see him like as a wrapped up iconic mummy for one scene, and then for the rest of the movie he just looks like a normal dude.
Hmm.
And that's an interesting too when we're talking about Universal monsters, right? Because Universal monsters are also like they're public domain, so they're also like the first costume a kid might want. They are on any Halloween commercial because they don't have to pay anybody for it. You know, they are icons and memes, and you don't even necessarily need to know a lot about any one of them particularly narratively, right? I mean, like I'm sure you came to this film knowing a bunch of stuff already about the Wolfman or a werewolf, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think either you've said it in one of your Star Trek videos with one of your other guests, or you and I have talked about it in reference to Star Trek. But there's this kind of osmosis about pop culture and Star Trek in general, where people that don't like Star Trek, don't watch Star Trek at all, they just know certain things just
Yeah.
because it's there, it's referenced, it's in movies, parodied and stuff like that, like Beam Me Up, Scotty and Klingons. I think that the Universal Monsters has that like thousand times over, where
Yes.
it's parodied so much and referenced so much and quoted so much that we all just know it by nature.
Yes. I mean, it's about to become a Universal Studios park,
Yeah.
the Dark Universe park that's going to have I think a Dracula ride and also a Frankenstein stuff, and so it's all really relevant in an
Yeah.
interesting way.
I don't
Uh,
know if your family is at like my family at all. I know a little bit about your family, but like when we get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas, we'd all just be sitting around eating. We wouldn't talk about things like how is your health or how is your business doing. There wasn't any kind of conversation like that. People would just reference movies constantly,
yeah.
and they would quote movies all the time.
Yes,
And my
absolutely.
family seemed to really, really enjoy these Universal monster movies. And they loved Abbott and Costello, and they would quote Abbott and Costello. That's the reason why I know about Abbott and Costello, is because of my grandmother and my aunt, and my uncle,
Right.
just constantly referencing these movies.
Yeah. My father was the one who showed me Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein,
Yeah,
which is itself an extraordinary. We're not doing an episode on it, although
yeah.
I've talked about it plenty of times on the show.
Hmm.
Um, it's one of those movies that it's an absolute like miracle that it's very good because everything about it should make it terrible, right? I mean, like you're just throwing Dracula, Frankenstein, the Invisible Man. Well, actually, it's more Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman, and then a story with like a wax museum and Abbott and Costello, and then they throw a love story in there, and it's I think famously like Lou Costello, when he got the script, he was like, my child could write a better script than this. This is terrible. And they just did it for the money. And it ended up being very good. It's
Hmm.
surprisingly very good and funny and like has good gags in it and stuff. It
Hmm.
shouldn't work, but it does.
No, and there's one part that I remember vividly that is like one of those you're not going through puberty yet, but you feel weird. Like as a kid watching the scene, like you kind of like, what's going on here? I'm intrigued. It's the scene where Dracula seduces the woman that's working in his laboratory,
Yeah, yeah.
where he's like, look into my eyes. And the effect in that movie, like you have little bats flying in Dracula's
Yeah, yeah,
eyes.
yeah.
And then when he bites her neck, she kind of has this look of like pleasure on her face. And I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, what's this about? You know? I
As
know.
they
How do
say,
you follow that up? I always have to bring up some kind of perverted thing on your show, you know?
no, it's all right. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. So in the classic Universal lineup, right? We've said it a billion times already. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Bride of Frankenstein. Sometimes they extend it to Jekyll and Hyde and the Phantom of the Opera. So despite the Wolfman being, the big famous one, it's actually not Universal's first attempt at a werewolf movie. The first werewolf movie came out in 1935 by Universal, and it was part of this series. And it's called Werewolf of London. And what's fascinating about that film is werewolves come out during moonlight, and werewolves can be killed by silver bullets, and werewolves you can catch lycanthropy from being bitten by a werewolf. All of those rules came from Werewolves of London, and continue into this film, The Wolfman. Before Werewolf of London and before Wolfman, you just turned into a werewolf if you made a deal with the devil. It was not very clear. So think about that. That is a cultural idea that you can pin down to the screenwriter of Werewolf of London.
Mm-hmm.
And
I,
it's
Go
yeah.
ahead. No, I think it's all fascinating because there's the werewolf lore, just like there's the vampire lore, and you expect this werewolf, played by Lon Chaney Jr., to exist within that lore. But you're telling me that there's a movie that predates it. I heard about that when I was doing my research. Um, but there is still this weird kind of mysticism that's in this movie too.
Yes.
There's like this
Yeah.
magical nature, and you mentioned Monster Squad before. There's that idea they're having this conversation like, well, what do you know about werewolves? And then it's that famous line: "If there's
Yeah.
only one way to kill a werewolf, it's with a silver bullet."
Right, right.
But there's more supernatural stuff in this movie than I was expecting from a werewolf movie.
And there's also something missing here, which some people don't notice, which is once the protagonist Lawrence Talbot is bitten by the werewolf, he just becomes the werewolf every night. There's no moon in this one. It's not until the second Wolfman movie, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, that they established the rule that he can only come out during the moonlight. Although that was a rule in Werewolf of London, which I feel like the only thing we remember of Werewolf of London now, right, is the song. The ooh, who is that?
I don't know, but he talks about seeing Lon Chaney Jr. walking down the street and he's like
Yes.
eating Chinese food or something. It's a crazy ass song if you listen to the lyrics.
Yeah, yeah. Who was that? Warren Zevon. Warren
Okay.
Zevon. So, one of the interesting things, and I know we're talking around the movie, but it's because we've got a larger theme. One of the interesting things, is this movie stars Lon Chaney Jr., but his father, Lon Chaney, Sr., although not called that, just Lon Chaney, was a huge silent film actor, and he played the Phantom of the Opera. He played a
Mhm.
lot of monsters, and he was the man of a thousand faces. And this is back in the time where, like in theater, you did your own makeup. So it wasn't like there were makeup artists, who were creating these things. Like, so in the silent age, Lon Chaney Sr. would make his own look. And sometimes he wasn't even playing anything crazy. Like I saw a movie recently where he just plays like a carny in like a freak show. What was it called? I forget. It's on Criterion. And he just gave himself a different face. He gives himself like a much more brooding kind of like face. And he was really supposed to be like the beginning, the star of this series, because the person who directed the movie I just talked about is Todd Browning, and he also directed Freaks. So actually, he did a lot of things with like the circus and stuff. And
Mm.
Todd Browning is the person who directs Dracula, which we consider as the beginning of the series. And Dracula, before Bela Lugosi, was supposed to be Lon Chaney Sr., but he was ill and he died before they could make that movie.
Mm.
So in an alternate universe, Lon Chaney would have been Dracula, and it would have he would have been the one who started off this whole series.
Wow.
Um, but Bela Lugosi is in this movie as well.
I know, and he's playing a guy named Bella.
Yeah, clearly, got to be some sort of homage to him.
Yeah, I love Bela Lugosi, and here's the thing: I've seen many clips of Dracula, but like I said, I haven't seen the full movie. I recently watched him in the Island of Dr. Moreau, that's in
Yeah.
black and white. I think it's the original one. Then I saw him in there was a movie with him and Boris Karloff. I think it was called The Black Cat. Did you ever see that one?
I haven't, but him and Boris Karloff made a lot of movies together.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was really
They're the two
interesting.
big headlines. They're like the Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr. of this series.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love him in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein too.
Yes.
He's obviously like charismatic and he's got that thick accent that you associate with Dracula. It's like the Dracula cliche accent that everyone uses.
Yeah.
It's based on his
Yes.
accent, right? Um, and he has it in this movie, but his face is so emotive. And he has a very, very small part in this movie,
Yeah.
but he's very he very quickly portrays how like cursed you are to become a
Yes.
werewolf. And I mean, he kind of has the pivotal role that sets this whole thing in motion.
Yeah, yeah. I love the. I'm going to use the word Romani because that's the correct
Yes.
term. But I
Yes.
love the Romani in this film. Bela, and then his mother. I have her name too. She's a great actress, an important
Mm-hmm.
actress. Like she was an acting teacher. Um,
Mm.
the thing with Bela is he. First of all, he is a great actor, so I'm not taking anything away from him. But I think part of what is so alluring about him is um well, he's perfect for Dracula, right? Because it's a lot of xenophobia. It's that white on white racism, right? Like the thing with Dracula is he's a European weirdo, right? He's a count of something. You don't quite know what his deal is or where he's coming from. He's clearly has old money. You don't know his age. Like that from the book Dracula, that's the idea of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Dracula is the first of these films, and this is right at the beginning of sound. So sound film begins, pretty much begins in 1927 with the Jazz Singer, and then Dracula comes out a few years later, and Dracula it's got a toe or a foot into the silent era
Mm.
because it doesn't have any background music. It has no score. It actually has a lot of silence, which you would never have now. And some of the mood of it is very, very. It's got that staid feeling that silent films sometimes had. But he was great because he had this like thick Hungarian accent. Like it used to not matter what you sounded like in the silent age, but now it's like we're in sound films, and he's in this movie and he's talking like a way like I imagine if you're someone in like the early 30s, maybe you've never heard anyone talk like that if you're in, like New York or whatever, wherever,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So you're like, what is this weird guy? And he sort of continues that here. There's a this sounds like I'm like I'm being racist, but it's there is a notice there's an otheredness about the
Mm-hmm.
characters he plays,
Mm-hmm.
and he embodies that so well as an actor. Both
Mm-hmm.
Dracula and in this film, Bela, who is this Romani who they call a gypsy in it, who comes into this very white English town with their different ways and stuff. And he sort of is perfect for that, especially because I think in general, what you have a lot in all of these Universal movies is you've got civilization or people trying to act civilized. And
Mm-hmm.
then the monster is this thing that breaks through that veneer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like in this film, Wolfman, Lon Chaney, who plays Lawrence Talbot, his father is Claude Rains, and they're like this rich old family. They live in a castle. Um, Clearly there's a lot of money. They've got, like the father's like into philosophy and has like his own like planetarium or whatever the fuck. Like they're like super like white civilized,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Logical and rational, right? Like there's a great scene in this film between Bela's mother, the Romani, and the Wolfman's father, where he's like, I don't believe in your witches' tales. And she challenges him because she could see he's clearly kind of scared.
Right.
It's the return, it's the Freudian thing, right? It's the return of the repressed.
Yes. I see that 100%. And I think this movie is the anti-white savior movie, right? I'm sure
Wow,
there's other
yeah.
examples, but usually you have this like white figure come into this setting where people are of a different background, it's a different location, and they might seem like primitive or something like
Yeah.
that. And then the white person saves the day.
Yeah.
But in this case, the white person is the one that just loses control and kills people and would essentially kill more people, you know?
Right, yeah.
And I think that you probably have this in your notes to reference this, but the guy that wrote this movie, he was a novelist named, I'm going to mess up his last name, but it's Kurt Siodmak or Siodmak. Do you
Yeah.
know how to say that last name?
I don't know. I've only read it. I think it's Syed Mac.
Siodmak. Let's go with Siodmak for this.
He
But he's a
also wrote other
novelist.
of these movies.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's a screenwriter, he's a director, he's a novelist. He was born in Dresden, Germany. He's born prior to
Mhm.
World War II and the Holocaust. He left Germany because he heard a tirade by Goebbels talking about, the Jews. It was an anti-Semitic tirade. So he left for the United States in 1937. And this movie, they've talked about how this movie is about like racism towards Jewish people, but they use
Mm.
Romani people as like the example right there. And at least one film critic talked about the well, okay, so he says that Talbot often behaves as if he had droit de seigneur. And I was wondering if you've ever encountered that term
No,
in your
no.
film. Okay, so he said that it's basically like prima nocta. Now you know what that is from
Oh,
watching
yeah, yeah,
Braveheart,
yeah.
right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Right? So like that's the way that Talbot acts in the very
Wow.
fucking
Oh,
beginning of the
wow.
movie,
Okay.
where he's walking
So,
around like he's like a big shot, right?
yeah.
Like I'm sure we were gonna get to this at some point. I'm sorry for jumping the gun
No,
here.
go right ahead.
But the guy Talbot, he just doesn't take no for an answer
No, it's
from the
very
female lead.
problematic. I just want to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
for anyone listening that doesn't know what prima nocta is, it's
yeah,
this concept that the ruler on the wedding night can actually take the bride and take her virginity before the bridegroom. You mentioned Braveheart, which is where I learned about it too. They talk about how it was a way to sort of for the English to sort of have it's a very primitive form of eugenics, really. It's a way of basically breeding, forced breeding of your people, against the people you sort of subjugate. Yeah, Lawrence Talbot comes into this. He comes home. We don't know where he's been. He comes home and he meets this girl, Gwen, that he likes. She's engaged to be married, but he does not give a shit at all. She tells him no. He goes, all right, I'll see you later. This is the problematic times where it's like, oh, all you got to do is you just got to wear her down. Just keep trying, and you'll get what you want. And you're right, he's a dick. He's an
yeah.
absolute dick. And it's funny that you brought that up. I wasn't thinking about that, but the thing that I think about in terms of this whole whiteness we're talking about is Bela Lugosi is the werewolf in the beginning, and he bites Lawrence, and Lawrence has a really cool, one of the best props ever, right? A cool like walking stick with a silver top that looks like a wolf with a pentagram
Hmm.
in it. And he uses the cane to beat the wolf to death, but then when it dies, he turns back into Bela Lugosi, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, you killed that guy!" So like, you think, okay, he's accused of murder. He doesn't get arrested. He doesn't go to jail. As a matter of fact, the chief of police hangs out with his dad and is basically like under the thumb of his father. And the father's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And then the father gets a psychiatrist to come in and to say, oh, he thinks he's a wolf. He's crazy. So, like, setting up an insanity plea. Basically, like, Larry could kill people. He doesn't get in trouble. He could take your wife. He doesn't get in trouble. He's a total dick. It's so
It
fascinating. You're right. It is like the anti-white savior
right.
because
It,
he
it's
gets punished. He gets punished for being an asshole.
Yeah, he gets punished by supernatural means. He doesn't get punished by man, by like
No,
society.
he's
Right,
above the law.
right,
He's above. He's got so much money and power and land. I mean, at
right.
one point, so the girl Gwen, she has a fiance, and we find out that he works in the castle. He works for the father. So of course, I could just take your. I could take
Yeah,
your fiance. You work for me.
right.
The
You know,
whole economy of all their lives is probably based around the Talbots.
yes, yes. I mean, it's funny, especially the part with the fiance is
Yeah.
really funny because he is so ridiculously chill with his bride to be, just hanging out with this guy that is constantly lusting for her,
Yeah.
right? But I knew I came to expect all this stuff. We're of that age where we know what it was like before, back in the old days, the way that movies were made and the way that men acted towards women. We know. Whereas if you were to show this to like 20-year-olds or like kids from my daughter's generation, they'd be like, what the fuck is this? They would
Yes.
cancel this movie in a second.
Yes.
But I knew that he was gonna flirt with her. I that trope of just like trying and trying, no matter how much the woman turns you down, is so ridiculous. But it's something that we've just grown up with our entire
Right.
lives.
This is the what was this, the 40s, right? This is 1941. I mean, it
Yeah.
persists all the way into the 90s. I
Oh,
mean,
I'd say it goes even to the early 2000s.
yeah, you're right, right.
Yeah.
I
It
mean,
might not be as severe, but yeah.
yes, that's
Go.
right. But I think of like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters. I mean, I love Ghostbusters, but the way Bill Murray treats Sigourney Weaver in Ghostbusters is this exact same way.
Yeah, it's scary because it's been going on for generations and generations, and now we're finally starting to right the ship. But what I do like about this movie is that through supernatural means, he does get his comeuppance. He's not like a bad guy. He's very like persistent. He doesn't like do anything outright evil or
No,
dastardly. You
he's
know, he's
got
not like
privilege. It's privilege.
right. His own entitlement makes him think he can act a certain way, but he's not this conniving villain. He doesn't have like a moment where he does something. He actually has a couple of moments where he goes to do something altruistic too.
Yeah.
But ultimately he does pay the price. I wanted to, because I referenced this one guy who mentioned that Prima Nocta. So the guy who wrote it, it was from a book called Planks of Reason, and the author's name was Bruce Kawin. And then he's the one that said the thing that was like Prima Noctis. Then he compared Talbot to a guy from a movie called Cat People. Have you ever seen that one?
Yes.
Okay, so he was saying that the main guy in that, Ken Smith, he goes after this woman in it, and both of them are these stereotypical all-American males who will not take no for an answer.
Hmm.
So both these men are like that.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the, like, you know, you watch these older movies and they're so archaic or so retro that they're entertaining and how different they are from nowadays.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of always have you're always going to be at a slight distance.
Yeah,
Um because the context will always be so, obvious to you.
right.
Um I mean another example of that, and I think this is something worth talking about
Sure.
this whole month is, are these movies scary? I think I've never been scared by any of these movies. The Wolfman doesn't scare me. Frankenstein doesn't scare me. None of them scare me. But you hear stories of people like were really scared when they came out. What does that mean? Does that mean people were dumber then? No. It means, you are always a product of the culture you live in and the media culture you live in.
Hmm.
And we now live in a world where, you could look at the Munsters or something like that, and like these things don't have that same feeling to you anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, even as a kid, I never found any of this scary, even though I liked it.
Right. It was never scary, but I always equate it with the idea that over time we get exposed to more and more severe things, right? So at the time of the 40s, even though World War II is upon them, in their culture, in their pop culture, you wouldn't necessarily see blood, right? Or
Yes.
like excessive blood. And if someone wants to get shot, they would just kind of like clutch at their chest and fall down.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you know, a kid goes to see like a PG-13 movie and you see someone get shot right in the head, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
But I will say though that this movie has incredible atmosphere.
Yes.
So if we're just going for the idea of like the Halloween aesthetic, the old horror movie aesthetic,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
has that like in spades.
Yes.
And then of course, everyone knows that his werewolf makeup was like the cutting edge
Yeah.
technology for special
Yeah.
effects technology for that. You know, because we always talk about Werewolf of London, the you know the movie from the 70s or whatever, and how like that
A
transformation
better
is
an
so,
American Werewolf in London.
that's what I meant. I'm sorry. Yes. But how amazing and the makeup effects are, and that
Yeah.
this was like the equivalent of that
Yeah.
back then,
Yes. Yeah.
which is so funny because when Talbot transforms, the first time that you see him actually transforming, it's not that Abbott and Costello transformation that we know.
Yeah.
It's just he like takes off his pants and his socks, and he just has really hairy legs
Right.
and feet.
Right. And then we see the basically that effect of using fade to one image to the same image, but the hair is progressed on his
Right.
feet, which
Right,
is
right. And
interesting.
it's funny because I always think about Abbott and Costello and I think about his actual transformation because they use those fades once again, but they've just gotten better at the process
Yeah.
and they've really gotten good at syncing up the music to the transformation. So like every time it fades, it
Yeah.
has that werewolf man theme where it's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so that does actually make there be a sense of tension and fear. But I was a 5-year-old kid watching this stuff and I wasn't scared.
Right. Something I wanted to mention, going along with everything we've been talking about with like the Larry Talbot characters like privilege, uh he's supposed to be English, right? His father's English. The father's played by Claude Rains
Hmm.
from Casablanca, and he also played the Invisible Man.
Right.
And Claude Rains has an English accent, but Lon Chaney Jr. doesn't have one at all, and he doesn't even try one. He's got this Midwestern accent, and it's crazy because the father's like, "Hello, son," and he's like, "How you doing, Pa?" And but it reminds me of, have you ever seen the Disney animated film Pocahontas?
No.
So in that film, who was it? Mel Gibson or somebody? I
Yeah,
think it
he's
was
John
Mel
Smith. Yeah.
Gibson was John Smith, but he does John Smith with an American accent.
Hmm.
And people at the time, or critics at the time, said if you're looking in terms of like representations of whiteness, obviously Europe is very white, but like a lot of these sort of Hollywood narratives, American is the most white. Like this guy was English, and then we know that he spent some time working in America, and now he just sounds so American. You don't. It's insane that they play father and son, and they sound
Hmm.
the way that they do.
Yes. I also feel like Claude Rains seems like he's too young to be Lon Chaney Jr.'s father, right? Doesn't it not seem
It's
like there's that
possible,
big of a
yeah.
difference in their
No.
age?
There it doesn't. He's also
Yeah.
much shorter. They just don't look like they could be
No.
related.
It's awkward as hell, but I really am glad that you made that point because that's super interesting. How like American is seen as like the ultimate white.
Yeah.
I feel like I am an example though of a person like this because I've lived in Texas for about 15 years now at this point, and I say y'all. There's certain things that have affected
Sure,
my New
sure.
York accent. But yeah, it's just a matter of they don't go the distance of having that consistency with accents and stuff back then. It just didn't matter, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things, this movie, there's not a lot to nitpick. We've kind of talked about the main issue, but the main issue is from that time.
Right.
Otherwise, when it comes to the actual telling of the story, the acting, this movie is like so tight
It's
on
very good.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
they're all tight. Dracula's like 65 minutes.
yeah.
They're all, a little bit over an hour. Because besides Dracula and like the first Frankenstein, most of these are kind of like B movies. Like we
Hmm.
think of them now as being super important, and they were huge money makers, but Universal didn't pour a lot of money into them.
Hmm.
They were not, they made a lot of money back because they went cheaper on a lot, especially a lot of the sequels as things went on.
Sure. Diminishing
No, it's so
returns.
good. Uh Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance, I think, is incredible.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this. The sort of folklore around this is that Lon Chaney Jr. was a very like sad, serious alcoholic. And
Mm.
many critics have said the reason he's probably so good in this role, because this is his most well-known role, is because being an alcoholic the way he was is similar to being a werewolf.
Hmm.
Like he
Hmm.
must know what it's like to wake up and go, what did I do before? Who did I hurt before that I love? And feel completely out of control.
Hmm.
And I feel like you can feel that.
Yes. And what is amazing about this movie is that they build in this supernatural aspect that I've never seen in another werewolf story, where you're marked
Yes.
by the werewolf, that he's essentially going to kill you next. And that's what freaks out Bela Lugosi in the
Yeah.
beginning. And then eventually Talbot's like love interest has that mark at the very end.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so interesting to make that comparison between alcoholism and this because you feel for a person that is the spouse, the love, the relative
Mm,
of the alcoholic, and you know how much damage they're going to have done to them.
yeah.
And so when I was talking before about like the altruistic thing that Talbot does,
Yeah.
he's given a like a charm by
Yes.
the Romani mom, right? Bella's mom.
Yeah.
And instead of keeping it for himself, he gives it to the woman that
Mm,
is his love interest. He wants to protect her from himself.
yeah.
So I actually really like that part
Yes.
because it's like he cares about her, and he
Yeah.
eventually wants to like turn himself in too.
Yeah. And he wants to die.
Yeah,
He's happy to die at the end. Yeah.
going along with the mark, the pentagram. It's interesting because you don't necessarily always associate. I mean, you actually never associate werewolf stuff with religious iconography. That's always kind of a vampire thing, right? But I did you ever watch the show Penny Dreadful by any
No, I
chance?
never have. I mean, I'm aware of it, but I never watched it.
Yeah, there's a connection because that Penny Dreadful is just like these Universal monster movies where there's like a vampire and Dracula's in
Uh-huh.
it, and they use all these Universal monsters in that show, and there is a religious connection between the wolf man or the werewolf person in that show and like God and angels and shit like that,
Well,
and that's the
that's
only
really
time I've ever
interesting.
seen that. Yeah, and then
Well,
what's interesting, kind of going back to that whole, it's a story of like prejudice against Jewish people.
mm,
The pentagram is very similar to the Star of David too,
yes. Yes.
and then and that's something that
Right.
happened to Jews,
Right. Yes.
right? At
Right.
one point
Right.
during like World War II, they'd have the star of
Right.
David
Right.
on them.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It is interesting because when you think in this film, um, almost what it's saying is like Christianity's wrong because you've got the Romani, and like when Bela dies, they bury him, and then a bunch of Romani come and like have like this big festival. It looks like a fair in honor of him. And it's bullshit that Larry actually goes because like who you can't go and hang out at the fair from the guy that you killed. But there's a scene where like they're in a crypt, and there's like a priest, and he's like, I don't know, you can't do that. And she's like, this is what our people have done for years. This is how we celebrate life. So it's sort of saying like, mainstream religion is wrong, mainstream whiteness is wrong, the consolidation of power and money is wrong. It's really subversive in a way.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the narrative that we see so often with movies nowadays, and I think this goes back to even like the 70s. I always think of like The Wicker Man and stuff as an example of this, is the idea of like people with like white and they're white and they're like Christians and they go to an area where it's people that have like kind of paganistic beliefs.
Hmm.
And usually the end result of that movie is the person gets involved in some kind of ritual where they're sacrificed, right?
Right, right,
In
right. Like
in
Midsummer or Wicker Man.
Right. The Wicker Man is my favorite horror movie. That I think that's the main example of that. But yeah, Midsummer is always the other example too. With this, there isn't any kind of ritual involved at all. The people don't really get revenge on him, but it's their knowledge of the supernatural that protects them from him,
Right,
and his ignorance of it leads to his death, his
right,
downfall.
right.
So,
The magical element or the supernatural element exists,
right,
but the so-called civilized people are blind to it. Right?
right.
Like think about like in the beginning, uh Claude Rains, you see he has his own observatory with like this great big telescope. Like that's his totem, right? And that's science, and that's looking ahead, that's looking to the stars, that's rationality, that's sort of like civilization or modernity. The totem for the Romani people is that like thing that she says, put over your heart.
Hmm.
And they're the ones who are right.
Yeah, and there's this great philosophical question debate uh, where it's a professor, I believe, that talks to Claude Rains, and they talk about the idea of the supernatural or something happening outside
Right.
of science, right? And they kind of go back and forth about, well, what's real? Can these kind of things happen? And
Right.
it's pretty deep for a movie from like 1941.
Right. Because what you don't think is going to happen is it's not like he becomes a werewolf and it's a secret and then everyone finds out, oh my God, he's a werewolf. He becomes a werewolf and he kind of right away tells people, and they go, no, you're mentally unwell.
Yeah.
They go, what you're suffering is you think you're a werewolf, but it's a mental problem. And they won't deal with the idea that it could be real.
Yeah, the dad talks about the Romani belief as like nonsense. And he keeps saying that like they filled your head with nonsense.
Yes. But then he tries to take him to church.
Yeah.
And there's that great scene where they go to the church, and like there's this there's I guess a matte painting of the I don't know what you call the stage, whatever the front of church is. I don't know much about church. And you
Like
see
the
like
altar?
yeah, and you see like there's beautiful like shafts of light coming through stained glass window. It's clearly like a matte painting. It's beautiful and moody, and this movie really has that sort of gothic look that you saw with like Dracula and Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And everyone looks at Larry, and he like gets freaked out and he leaves. So it's like he
Yes.
can't even hang out with them anymore.
Yes.
Because he's sort of touched by this other thing. And they, we haven't said Bela Lugosi is, besides being the werewolf, his like occupation, I suppose, is he's a fortune teller
Yes.
and a palm reader, and they sort of treat it like a joke, like, oh, let's go get a fortune read.
Yeah,
Ha ha
yeah.
ha. But of course, like he's right.
Yeah. They bring this random girl, like her friend, to
Yes.
go. And the girl goes first, so she gets her palm read and she's got the pentagram on her
Yeah.
hand. And he's like, oh shit, I'm gonna kill her next. But I want to talk about that church scene real quick before we jump on into another thread. But like, have you ever seen Silver Bullet, the one that's based on the Stephen King story?
No, I haven't.
You know what I'm talking about with the werewolf though?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't seen it
Oh,
though.
okay, Silver Bullet's actually really good if you get a chance to watch it. I'm just going to bring this up for your viewers, and I'll try to make this not that painful for you. But there's a really famous sequence in a church in that movie, but it's almost like the inverse of this sequence because the kid that's the main character is the only human in this sequence, and it's a dream sequence, and everyone in the church becomes a werewolf, and they're all flipping out, and he's looking at them. So I was like, is this an inspiration for that scene in Silver Bullet? It's a really great scene.
I think that could be very possible.
Yeah, yeah. If you get a chance, check it out because that's actually one of my favorite werewolf
Oh,
movies.
interesting. Yeah, I definitely
Yeah,
would. That sounds
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Um, I wanted to say the we haven't said her name yet. Bela Lugosi's mother, the old Romani lady, her name is Maleva, and she's
Maleva.
played by Maria Ospensaka,
Okay.
or Ospenskaya. She was a
Hmm.
singer and an actress and an acting teacher. She's the co-founder of the American Laboratory Theater, and she was the first person to teach the Stanislavski method in America, which then
Wow.
one of her students was Lee Strasberg, and he sort of changed it and developed it into what we think of as method acting. So this one's
Oh
actually
my
like
God.
hugely important in the history of acting.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
She
It
does a great performance.
absolutely, absolutely. And there's a couple of different things that the Romani people say, and then even just the people in the village say too, that they say it with such earnestness and sincerity that you're like, oh, this does have power. Like
Yeah.
they always say the one thing, this like kind of this quote where it's like, even as a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright, right? That's one of their
Yeah.
sayings. Then she has her own little thing that she says to help calm him down when he's the
Yeah.
wolf man one time. And he's got his foot stuck in a bear trap,
Yes.
right? And then it's just so perfect because she's there to do it one last time at the very end when he's dying to transform him back too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought she was fantastic. I mean, but you see this performance, and it's one of those things where you just come to expect that in a story like this because of movies like this. You always
Right.
expect to find that wise, and when we were growing up, we would always say gypsy, right? We're gonna say Romani now, but you would expect that kind of character all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a stereotype. It's
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, I mean, if you see the way that they're dressed, like they're absolutely fit into that stereotype. But that's the thing about this film is it's foundational. It's a foundational text. Like we said, like a lot of the rules come from this movie and from the other earlier film, Werewolf of London. And
Yeah.
you should also say that um in the Universal canon, this film and The Mummy are the only two that aren't based on any literature. Dracula
Mm-hmm.
and Frankenstein are based on classic books. Invisible Man is based on a later book by H.G. Wells.
Mm-hmm.
This is, the mythology of a werewolf existed, although wasn't like what they make it here. So this is really foundational. Like, I mean, like every werewolf thing you've seen since this is in some way in dialogue with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. I have friends. A lot of them are on my channel and stuff. Who are into horror movies, and then I have also friends that are horror writers or really love horror fiction. And one of them famously said that there aren't really any good werewolf movies besides this one and an American Werewolf in London. Uh, some people don't like werewolf books at all. Some people love werewolves. I was going to ask you, do you have a werewolf movie that you love?
Let me think about that for a
Yeah.
second. It's interesting when you put them next to like vampires and zombies, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're like the third class
Mm-hmm.
citizen there, right? I remember like in the late 90s after Scream, Wes Craven directed a werewolf movie that they tried to market like Scream. I forget what it was called.
First.
Was that it? Oh yeah, Cursed, right? With Christina Ricci.
Mm-hmm.
Offhand, I can't think of one. I can't think of one. I mean, maybe my favorite werewolf is um Seth Green from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oz.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
but you
I
would say
think
Silver
that
Bullet?
no, I'd say it's in my top five, and I'm not like a huge werewolf fan either. I kind of like them as like supporting characters when you have other monsters in
Right.
something, like the Universal monsters, like Monster Squad. Like I like when they're like the grunts or the sort of the little like first boss before you get to the main boss.
Right.
Um, no, but I would say probably an American Werewolf in London is probably my favorite out of
Yeah,
all of them.
right. That's an incredible movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I liked all the Universal. I'm not going to be around for your Dracula discussion and stuff, but I liked when they tried to revive some of the Universal monsters
Mhm.
with like Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein
Yeah.
and of course Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. I love
Yeah.
that too.
That's a great
But
movie. That's
yeah,
maybe
that's a
probably my favorite Dracula.
yeah. That's a whole side discussion. You were going to say something else though?
Well, I was gonna bring up something. I had two things I want to say. One is, you were talking before about the aesthetics of the film. I
Yeah.
don't want to. I want to mention the woods because when I imagine like spooky Halloween woods at night, this is
Mm-hmm.
what I imagine. The
Mm-hmm.
the the look of the woods, and it's all fog machines. It's all trees that are like jutting out in weird directions that are like super weird looking. This is like the platonic ideal of spooky woods in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just think about that as a meme, right? How the woods in this movie, I think, have influenced so many other woods in other scary movies.
Yeah, there are shots in this movie where it's like the Wolfman behind a tree and it's all foggy and there's moonlight coming down and it just looks like a fucking painting. And it looks like a painting that you've seen 100 times before
Yeah,
because they just use this imagery. Like this is like the
right.
template that people
Yeah,
base things on.
yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is kind of weird, it's something I'm kind of reading into the movie.
Mm.
So we were talking about before about the sort of ethics of Lawrence Talbot and the way he treats women and the way he has privilege and the way he kind of gets away with everything. So like he gets bit by the werewolf and he becomes a werewolf, and the your next victim, if you look at their hand, you'll see the pentagram on their hand, and he looks at the girl he's is falling in love with, right?
Hmm.
And it's gonna be her. But it made me think like first, first, what are the odds of that? But then it made me think a little bit of something like, maybe it's not all on the outside coming in, right? Maybe some of it again is repression, right? Is the inside coming out?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And again, that makes me think about alcoholism, how you hurt your loved ones when you're an alcoholic or an addict.
Yes.
I guess a similar thing that it remind me of is like in Twin Peaks,
Mm.
spoiler alert, Laura Palmer is killed by her father, Leland Palmer. And in the show, you get this idea when it's revealed, you get this idea of like Leland was a normal guy and he was like possessed by Bob, this malevolent spirit. But then when
Right.
you watch the movie, which is a prequel, Firewalk with Me, you
Hmm.
see that he's even before being like fully possessed, he's lecherous towards his daughter and incestuous towards his daughter. And you realize that there's something more complex going on there, that it's not all Bob. Some of it
Hmm.
is Leland. Some of that darkness is coming inside of him.
Hmm.
Made me think that's probably true here too.
Hmm.
Like, why does he kill this girl that he supposedly loves? It's got to be related. And again,
Hmm.
I'm reading into this. I don't know. I'm not saying that the author of this film put that in. It's just something that, thinking about this larger theme about like repression and the return of the repressed and the darkness that we keep inside and how that kind of like comes through.
Mm.
It seems like it's gotta, I don't know, it seems meaningful to me.
Yeah, I think that in modern films, we're much more aware of like the characters' motivations and like why certain things happen to them based on their own internal thoughts. I think back then things were a little bit more simple, but it sounds like this guy, Kurt Siodmak, who wrote this, wrote pretty complex things and, had a lot to say about the world. If you think about like Talbot's actions, right? He wouldn't have been in the scenario to get bit by the werewolf if he wasn't like really trying to force it with this woman who was engaged to be married to another guy.
Right,
They go
right.
to go get their palm read by the Romani people, but he wouldn't have even been there at all. He would have interacted with Bela as a werewolf
Yeah.
if he had just, So I think that that's kind of the closest we get to it being like faded or like something coming from inside of him that sets it all up.
Mm,
But it definitely is like the urges and stuff. It's more like a sexual predator type thing.
yeah,
I know there's
sure.
the whole alcoholic spin that you were talking about before, but I've read a couple of books by like David J. Stahl where he talks about horror movies, and
Mm,
one of the things I think you and I have even talked about on other shows is the idea of that these movies represent like this like repressed sexual nature, or
oh,
like the
yeah.
monsters often act because of a sexual thing. Like
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
compared. I don't even know. Have we even fucking talked about this today? Where like they compare being a werewolf to puberty.
I don't know if I don't think we talked about this today, but I think we might have talked about it on when we talked about Nightmare on Elm Street last Halloween, because
Okay,
I think it's a big part of slashers, the
right,
idea of like the slasher killer is like a stunted pubescent boy, a boy who like didn't fully go through puberty.
right. And so I think that it's not the same thing as a slasher here, but it is the idea of like this man from like a noble family just sort of like losing control of himself, losing control of his lust, and taking it out on a woman, forcing himself onto a woman. I think that that's
Yeah,
what we're getting here. And I mean, the puberty
right.
connections you definitely see because of all the hair
Yeah,
growing
true.
on
Right,
him,
right,
right?
right, right.
And just kind of like losing control of yourself, because of lust, right?
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. I mean, I don't think we said it, but he sees her because he's looking through his father's telescope. And
Yeah.
instead of looking up, he looks across the way
Right.
into her bedroom. I mean, it's the perfect male gaze in cinema, right? Like the first time he sees her, he's spying on her in
Hmm.
a place where she thinks she's safe. And this was during what do you call it? The Hays Code, the production code time. So it's got a lot of censorship in terms of what it's allowed to show. But what all that really means is that like you just dig a little deeper and the stuff's there. So like
Yeah.
you get the idea that he's like looking at her naked, even though you don't see that. And he
Right.
even does this very creepy thing when he goes to meet her. Like he goes and he's like, because she runs like a antique shop. He's like, I'm looking for some earrings that look like moons, and she's like, oh, we don't have that. And he's like, well, what about the ones you were just wearing in your bedroom? Can you sell those to me? And she's like, what are you talking about? How did you see me? And it's really creepy.
Yeah. It's so forward, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Yeah. He's like, oh, I'll just take that cane over there instead then.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's his move.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's such a different fucking time back then.
There isn't a sequel to this. The next Wolfman movie is Wolfman Meets Frankenstein, and then he's in the House of movies, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, and then he's kind of one of the protagonists in Abbott and Costello, and he's a very
Hmm.
different character there. He's like he lives with the sort of sadness of being a werewolf, and I mean, the whole scene in that movie where he tells Abbott, like, no, he tells Lou Costello, like, tie me up and don't let me out. Like, that whole thing's actually really funny.
Oh yeah.
It's a very good movie. And he still plays it straight, even with, I guess I haven't talked too much about his performance. I think he's like a live wire. Like, there's some, like, when he's in the bear trap, you look at his face and it's like, maybe he learned a lot from his father, like silent movie acting, because it's all in his face. Like, he's got this crazy rawness, that's very different from like the sort of stoic performance that you get from Bela Lugosi. He's like
Hmm.
very like raw there, and I think his performance really elevates everything.
When I think of Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance, I always think that his eyebrows are up, like in this sort of like pleading look, like
Hmm.
where he always looks like sad
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah,
please help me. When
yeah,
we're talking about Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein,
yeah.
in this he's very charming, but he kind of transforms into that mode at one
Right.
point, and then to think that he's the man underneath the werewolf makeup, it's a very stark transformation because he is this kind of charming guy in this movie, and then he becomes the Wolfman, and the Wolfman truly does seem like an animal in this.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you see his eyes. You see Lon Chaney's eyes when he's a human. You see him when he's a werewolf under all that fur, and he's got a totally different look in his eyes when he's the Wolfman.
Yeah. 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 Right.
In
He's
this,
selling that makeup, right? I mean, he's
oh
really
yes,
selling it.
oh yes, yeah. He really does feel like a monster. I mean, considering this came out in 1941, special effects were what they were at that time.
Right.
It's really impressive for its time.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's like probably like 90% performance based.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you, the intensity. Like because we essentially see him in like two modes in this movie, right? This sort of like smarmy, I want this woman. That's like 50% of the role. Then the other 50% is, oh shit, I think I'm a wolf man. Like, do something to help me. That's pretty much it. And he sells both.
Yes, he does sell both. I mean, look, you could a lesser actor, you just be like, there's a guy with fucking fur on his face,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like the fact that you really feel like he's like gonna like kill you, like he's really like he doesn't hold back. He's really
No.
snarling, and it's like it's a fearless performance. He's really going for it.
Yeah. Other werewolves in movies have like long claws, or they're like way bigger than people, or they move like dogs and stuff, and
Right,
their
right.
clothing is totally ripped. They're bent over like a dog or a wolf. This is just a man covered in fur in human clothes,
Yeah.
and yet he's one of the more intimidating ones out of
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. The Wolf Man. Well,
Yes.
Peter, I think we've discussed this. We've done a good Halloween episode. We're recording this a little early. Do you know you have a podcast and YouTube channel called Lassercast where you deal with horror stuff? Do you know what you guys are doing for Halloween?
Oh, I wish, man. I don't even know what I'm doing next week, honestly. I mean, at the time of this recording, we were just, about to interview this guy who wrote Aliens Expanded. He
Uh-huh.
made the documentary Aliens Expanded. He
Yeah, yeah.
directed it too. And now we're going to interview him for The Thing Expanded.
Oh, okay.
They're going to make a sequel to that. Really interesting guy. And we're kind of in the time of like Aliens Romulus just coming out, so that's kind of the big thing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but just in general, in my channel, we talk about, anything that's coming out in the theaters. Danny goes and sees it.
Yeah, yeah.
He does real short reviews. If there's a TV show, a streaming show, like we've covered Interview with the Vampire and things like that, we are always going to cover that as well.
Mhm.
But we actually have never talked about the Universal Monsters on our channel. So it was actually a real pleasure talking about it with you today.
Well, thank you very much. You're welcome back anytime you want. Peter Marsh, thank you for being here. You have another channel too. You want to talk about that for a second?
Should Yeah, Comic Books Transformed. That's where we talk about comic book adaptations from comics into streaming shows and movies. And at the time of this recording, I was preparing for that by watching Batman the Caped Crusader. Have you checked that out yet?
Yes, I've seen like the first three or four. I
I'm up
like
to
it.
episode I'm up to episode 8. I'm just fucking loving that.
Yeah, I like it too. I like it too. Well, have you seen what's that Marvel werewolf thing? Like,
Oh, Werewolf by Night. We
yeah,
covered
what
that.
the fuck was that? Was that good?
uh, it was better than a lot of the more recent Marvel stuff, and it was done in black and white and had that really cool look to it. Um, but no, it's based on a comic. There's a
Oh,
guy
okay.
who turns into a werewolf. Yeah,
All right. Peter,
yeah.
thank you so much for being here. We end every episode by saying
Go bye bye.